Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Friday Night Drive Week 8 podcast. I'm Josh Welge, joined by Steve Soucie as we tape on Wednesday afternoon. And Souce, we're about 9 or 10 days, 10 days away from the selection show and 9 days away from a very, very long Friday night for you. How you doing, and are you getting caught up on your sleep before next week?
Yeah, I start trying to stagger it a little bit, like make myself go to bed a little bit earlier, try to get a few more hours in when I can here or there, because once about Thursday rolls around, I'm either fielding questions from people or cultivating results from weird parts of the state or whatever. So for about a 48-hour period, sleep is put directly on the back burner. So I enjoy it. I'm not complaining about it. It's just the reality of the situation.
No, I remember staying up with you, just following you along last year as you were going at 2:30, 3 in the morning, just chatting with randoms at 2:30 and 3 about everywhere corner of the state. And that's a lot of fun. Looking forward to that. As we look ahead to next week, but we're not at next week yet. We're at week 8, and a lot of good games on tap. But as we usually do, I wanted to kind of discuss where we're at, playoff projections wise. You have your latest projections on FridayNightDrive.com today. On the one hand, it sounds like we're starting to get a little bit of a crystallized picture of the playoffs. I think there's 102 6-wins teams and about 67 or so 5-win teams. And then there's a whole lot of people after that are in line to get into the playoffs. Where do you see it right now?
Well, there's just, like you said, there's a lot of churn in that middle group. That 4 and 3, 3 and 4 group is larger than I can ever remember. And there are a couple reasons for that. I'll be honest, there are less 0-win teams than we usually have at this time too. There are less 7-win teams. There are less 6-win teams. And where are all those teams going? They're flocking towards the middle. So when we're getting into this last week of the season, usually we'll have 20 to 25 games around the state that pit 4 and 4 against 4 and 4 in week 9. I mean, I've been kind of mocking out some scenarios. That number could jump as high as 40 this year, where we could literally have what are basically week 9 playoff games. Winner gets in, loser probably doesn't. Situations all over the state in a lot more games than we're used to. So that makes for a lot of upheaval at the bottom part of the bracket. And that's always the hardest part to figure out. But now there are even more variables, and that's making it a lot trickier.
The other thing too, and you noted in your story today is, I mean, a lot of these are coming from the same league. I think the Big Northern Conference has 4 teams that have either 3 or 4 wins. I know the Southwest Prairie West is in the same scenario. I think the Kishwaukee River Conference has a number of teams. I mean, there's going to be, so like you mentioned, sort of like some early playoff games in week 8 and week 9 in those leagues.
And some of them are layered too, because it's like, yeah, they might have 3 or 4 wins, and then one of the teams has beat the other one, but that other one beat the other team that lost to the other one over there. So you can't draw a straight line through these. That's the thing. Sometimes you'll get in these situations. Yeah, there's 3, 4, and 3 teams, but one of them beat 2 of them. One of them lost to 2 of them, and it's pretty clear. But here we've got a win here, a loss here, a win here, a loss here, and it's kind of all over the place. So you can't do a real clean stack, and that's what's making it really, really difficult to try to project it and then know that week 9, it always does, but how many upset the apple cart games are there going to be? Is it going to be 5? Is it going to be 15? Is it going to be 25? I mean, that's where it really comes down to.
I know the one thing that I keep harping back to every week is, the 4 and 5s. Where does that stand right now? And, do you have any projections on about if it could go up or down in the next week?
It could go either way. It started to settle down. It started to spike down. There's only 6 this week. And like I've told people before, this is definitely a situation where it's like the projection is saying best case scenario for a lot of teams, but a lot of those teams probably are not going to meet that best case scenario. So the key is when they don't do it, who beat them? Is it a 3 and 4 team that needed that win desperately to try to get to 5? Or is it a 2 and 5 team that doesn't really have any chance of getting into the field? Was a spot created? was it taken away? I mean, that's where we start to get into the machinations. I still strongly believe we will not get away with not having any 4-win teams in the field. Now, how many? I'm starting to bend a little bit on maybe it won't hit double digits, but I still think we're going to end up somewhere in the 4 to 8 variety with the potential of it going up. I don't think there's any scenario where we're like looking at it going, oh, who's the 5-win team that gets bumped? I don't think that's going to happen, but I do think there's a potential for maybe that list to tighten up just a little bit, but there's still literally hundreds of openings to make it a lot larger.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of length. We always use this term playoff eligible for 5-win teams. And it's like, okay, I think they're in, not sure they're in. And now we got the 4 and 5 equation. 5-win team gets to 5 wins. How secure should they feel? And what scenarios could a 5-win team maybe not make the playoffs?
Well, I think really, for me, it comes down to playoff points at this point in time. I mean, if you look at like the history and where we're at in terms of the number of teams that we are playing, if you have a playoff point total that's below 30 at this point in the game, you have to pay attention to, well, maybe we're not 100% locked in here as a 5-win team. That's obviously where we go. If you have a playoff point total under 25, you better make sure that the trends are going the way that they need to. There are a couple of teams right now that are trending towards finishing with 5 wins that have really bad playoff point situations. And those are the kinds of teams that you got to kind of hope that there's not a whole bunch of these 4-4 teams that are playing a team with a much better record and we're not expected to win. You better hope that they don't get froggy on week 9. And sometimes they do. And that's what would be taking them away. But if you're at 30, 32 right now, you're fine. There's really no mathematical way for you to get knocked out.
And just to be clear, that the scenario that you had talked about a few seconds ago, that's if there are no 4 and 5 teams in the playoffs.
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of good stuff. A league that I think is going to be well represented in the playoffs. Once again, is the CCL ESCC. I want to bring in Michael DeWiljak, who covers the league for us. Michael, how you doing today?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Doing well, thank you. And I wanted people to point out, Michael has got his CCL notebook that's up. A lot of good stuff in there. And one of the things you talked about is just the kind of the state of where the playoffs are for that league. I think there's 12 teams that are currently at 6 or 5 wins. Among that group that is not quite there yet, what are some of the teams that you're kind of keeping an eye on as we head into week 8?
I mean, the thing is, there are a bunch of teams, right? I think the biggest team is Brother Rice. I know that they are continuously ranked and they've competed well and beat Mount Carmel. They just need to get that 5th win, and it's kind of hard to do when they have the schedule that they do have. But Brother Rice is definitely a top team that I'm looking at. There are a lot of other good teams. St. Viator's good. Carmel's obviously got a lot of talent. Providence is really good too, and they just face some tough teams. So, I mean, there are a lot of good, CCL, ESCC teams, and I'm sure there aren't too many, coaches, fans, anything like that feeling bad for CCL, ESCC programs, beating up on each other and having a hard time getting to that 5th win or even that 4th win, depending on obviously how many playoff points they have. But there are a bunch of good teams that obviously have 3 wins right now and are scrapping in order to get at least number 4. Hopefully that would work, or obviously trying to get number 5 to make sure that they can definitely get in. But Brother Rice definitely leads that group. Obviously, St. Ignatius is in there too. 2 teams in the CCL, ESCC Blue that obviously have tough schedules and are just scraping for trying to get to 4 and 5 at this point.
Well, it's funny you bring up Brother Rice. You're going to be seeing them on Friday, playing St. Lawrence. So really kind of a fascinating matchup. Brother Rice got that, they had a little bit of they lost a few games, but then they got that big win and go over Mount Carmel a couple weeks ago. And St. Lawrence, I think they were the last unbeaten team in the CCL ESCC. No longer the case, but nonetheless, one of the better stories in that league. What do you think about that matchup?
I think it'll be interesting just to kind of see, for Brother Rice, can everything kind of come together against a very, a fairly competitive team like St. Lawrence, right? Like, I feel like, I've talked to Casey Quenenfeld, Brother Rice's coach, for a lot of the season, and the same sticking points of, not converting deep into opponent's territory and on offense. And limiting the third and longs on defense have really kind of hurt them for much of the season. So I'm curious to see just, heading into week 8, how much has that kind of progressed for Brother Rice? And, at what level is this offense at right now? We've seen glimpses from, junior quarterback CJ Gray, who has a lot of talent. Obviously, Tyler Lofton is a really good senior running back for them. And they've got a lot of playmakers to complement it and a very elite defense. So I'm curious to see where is Brother Rice's offense at this point. And, for St. Lawrence is pretty much how do you compete not only with like a neighborhood rival, Brother Rice and St. Lawrence are not too far away from each other, but at the same time, can St. Lawrence, a 4A team, compete at the level with Brother Rice at 7A at the 7A level? Obviously, we've seen St. Lawrence get off to a 6-1 start. Their lone loss to Fenwick this year. So is this Vikings team, able to keep up with a bigger school like Brother Rice and obviously try to get a little upset pick there? So I'm really interested to see, how both of these teams kind of look and, how are they kind of feeling heading into the final, at this point, 2 weeks into the season.
Another game that I'm really kind of curious about this week is Fenwick playing Mount Carmel. Fenwick is a team that I don't want to say quietly, but maybe people haven't talked a ton about. But I mean, they're 6-1. Their only loss, came down to a 2-point conversion against Joliet Catholic and Mount Carmel. If I was starting to get a little bit worried about them, they kind of dissuade that a little bit in that second half last week against Joliet Catholic. Really coming on strong with Jack Elliott, leading the way. What do you think about that game?
I think that'll be a really interesting one just to kind of see, for Fenwick. I feel like, Fenwick has been tested. They've played some good teams this year. They beat St. Ignatius, obviously, in the CCL Blue. But I'm curious to see where that kind of ranks when it comes to playing against Mount Carmel, right? Is that offense able to put up enough points against that really strong defense? And can that defense of, Nate Marshall, going to Auburn from the defensive line, Jack Paris, a good linebacker for the Friars, and Tommy Thies, are they able to limit and kind of see what other teams have kind of done against the Mount Carmel's offense? Where I know Joliet Catholic did a good job of limiting the Caravan last week, but a lot of it felt like Mount Carmel was getting in its own way than anything else. Obviously not converting from the 3-yard line with the fumble late there in the first half. So I'm really interested to see, how does Fenwick kind of match up against Mount Carmel, and how does that defense match up against that offense? Is it able to create pressure on Jack? Does it try to kind of, test the arm and that sort of stuff and his athletic ability? So that should be a really fun matchup just to kind of see how they kind of, pair up heading into the final week here.
What other games are you looking at? I mean, I could go different directions. I mean, that DePaul Prep St. Francis game is interesting just because I'm curious about DePaul Prep. And then, IC Catholic, sort of backs against their wall. St. Viator, similar situation. They've lost 4 games in a row, I believe. I mean, I don't know where you want to go with this, but there's some interesting storylines in week 8.
There are some interesting storylines. IC Catholic and, St. Viator, both teams at 3-4. It's not a must-win game, but it's pretty close to it, right? Like, you just need to figure out what you are and who you are at this point. St. Viator has faced a really tough schedule after, beating Richmond Burton in last year's 5A playoffs. So, and they've got a lot of talent coming back. So it'll be really interesting to see, is Viator able to kind of beat IC Catholic? Is IC Catholic finally, hitting its stride and, putting up some strong performances inside the state? So that'll be interesting. And yeah, the DePaul matchup is really interesting to me as well, just based on, that offense has done really well. Juju Rodriguez does a really good job as their quarterback. Nick Martinez is a great running back for them. But I'm really interested to see, how does that match up against St. Francis, who obviously beat Loyola earlier in the season, and how healthy is St. Francis? I feel like they've kind of dealt with some injuries here and there throughout the season. Obviously on the smaller side of things when it comes to teams in the CCL, ESCC. So I'm really interested to see how they kind of fare in that matchup. And another big matchup I'm interested in, Naz and Bennett playing against each other this week. Bennett, not really able to put up too many points last week. Nazareth had the bye because of the De La Salle forfeit. Can this, I'm curious to see, does this offense for Bennett, can that continue to kind of put up, big numbers as it did earlier in the season? Because, Naz's defense has made critical plays here and there. They did a great job in the second half against St. Rita in order to take control of that game in week 6. But, at the same time, Bennett has an opportunity to take advantage of some moments. And if that offense is able to get going, that's, especially throwing the ball, I think that's going to be really important for them heading into the playoffs. So, playing against Nazareth, I think that's going to be a really good test. It should tell us a lot, about where Bennett is heading into the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree with that Bennett game. I know they got beat pretty handily by Fenwick, but something tells me, I kind of read a little bit, I heard a little bit, that was sort of a perfect storm. Just things went haywire for them against Fenwick. I'm not sure if there's a 35-point difference between those two teams, and but obviously now they got to get back at it going to Nazareth this Friday, so that'll be a tough one. Michael, thanks again for joining us. That's Michael DeWolje, covers the CCL ESCC for Friday Night Drive. Check out his notebook; it's online right now. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Yep, thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Michael.
Soucie, as we kind of look away from the Catholic League around the state, one thing you pointed out in a story you've coming tomorrow, looking at some of the top games, is look, we talk about the playoffs, every week, and understandably so, but there's some games this week they're going to decide conference titles, and I think that still means something to a lot of programs. I know I talked to Oswego coach Brian Cooney. They have a big game this week, and he said, maybe we haven't talked about it quite as much the last few years, but it's still a very important thing around our program. And there's some big games. And man, the one that stands out for me though is Byron and Dixon. I mean, Byron has been, the class of the Big Northern Conference and one of the best teams in the state, at that level. Make the case for me why Dixon can make a difference this week.
I think some of it comes down to the fact that, I think Dixon gave themselves a little bit of a test coming into this game. Yeah. They went down and played Johnston City last week. It was a long road trip. They came out of it with a pretty solid win over a team that was previously undefeated before they played them. I expect Dixon to go in there with some confidence.
Yeah.
And frankly, I mean, no offense to anyone else in the conference, Byron has not had a competitive game this year.
Right.
So if Dixon comes out and shows that they can get some stuff done early on, how does Byron respond to that? Now, I mean, you can make the argument that Byron hasn't had to deal with that much at all for the last couple of years.
Right.
I mean, they rambled through almost everything that they did last year, other than maybe the semifinal against Montini. But, that's just something they don't really have to deal with very much because they're that good. So, I think it's possible that Byron dominates this game as well. Do I think it's extremely likely? I'm not sure I'm sold on that. I think this might be, at the very least, a somewhat competitive game.
Yeah, it's one of those things that teams are not challenged until they're challenged.
Yep.
At some point, the run of 50-0 games, it does end at some point. It doesn't mean that a team's going to lose, but they don't last forever. And Dixon, I mean, they've been darn impressive this year. They've just been putting up some enormous numbers this year. They've been very impressive. But Byron is Byron. So that's going to be a game to watch. Dixon, where do you have the 4A? That's where they're kind of situated right now.
Yeah, there's really no movement to that. They're a 4A team.
Yeah.
Obviously they would like most teams, they would like to get as high as they possibly can on the seed chart. A win would be huge in that. Probably gives them the number 1 seed in the 4A North bracket. That bracket has been kind of morphing in weird ways because there's some strange teams between 4 and 5, like right on that bubble. You got teams like Morris, Rochelle that might end up in either one of those two classes. When I think about 4A teams, I don't think of those two teams as 4A teams, but if they are, they immediately become really dangerous components in that North bracket. So Dixon would obviously want to put themselves in the best possible position to kind of maybe stay away from teams like that if they do end up in 4A for as long as possible.
So there's a little team called East St. Louis that I feel like we really have not talked about since that week 1. Very impressive game. They get a tough one this week, though. Edwardsville is one of the, maybe the other really strong, program in that neck of the woods. And East St. Louis has a pretty tough game week 9 as well. I think, IMG Academy?
Yeah.
They're playing. What do you think about that matchup as you look at Edwardsville and East St. Louis?
You look at it and on paper, you're thinking, well, East St. Louis is probably a pretty comfortable favorite in this one. But Edwardsville's a strong program, and they take pride in being a consistently productive team. They've had some success. They've gone a couple of rounds in 7 or 8A, wherever they end up. They're one of those bubble teams too as well. But I don't expect them to roll over here. I do expect East St. Louis is still a pretty substantial favorite here. I mean, they've played, what you call the national schedule, beat some good teams this year after really kind of putting it on Loyola back in week 1. Seems like that was months ago at this point in time. But, East St. Louis is really, really good. And that's the reality of the situation. But Edwardsville in the past has thrown some haymakers at them. There have been some good games in this series. Not sure if this is one of them, but it wouldn't be unprecedented if we had a real dogfight on our hands here.
Yeah, kind of did a quick check on East St. Louis to see how they've been doing since that Loyola game, and let's just say they've been doing pretty good. Played a couple tough games from teams from Pennsylvania, and they just been rolling over, Illinois teams since then. So, but yeah, we'll get a good idea about where they're at this week and certainly next week as well. A game sort of more closer to my backyard. I'm going to be at this game Friday. Mokena at Oswego. Soucie, that's a matchup that I've seen some really good games over the years and a really good recent history. I think 2019, Mokena snapped Oswego's 24-game conference winning streak. Oswego beat them the next year in the spring game that sort of decided the conference title. Man, these teams play some really close games, and I know Mokena had that game they'd rather forget against Yorkville, but I'm expecting another really close game, and I don't expect much scoring.
Yeah, I think that's fair. One of the things about this game, at least this year's version of the game, that is kind of, I guess, I know what I expect from Oswego, and they've pretty much delivered that all year long. They've done Mokena. I don't know what I'm going to get from them on a week-to-week basis. I know they're going to be keyed up for this game. This is a big rivalry game that has kind of developed over time between these two programs, but their results have been really inconsistent this year. They've had some games where they just ran over somebody. They've had other games where I thought they would run over someone and they didn't. They had that one loss, like you mentioned, to Yorkville, that kind of seemed to come out of nowhere almost. So I don't know what version of Mokena shows up. If it's the really good version, we're going to have a battle on Friday night. But if it's not, I think Oswego will do what they've done to a lot of teams, just kind of systematically pick them apart and eventually kind of break away and run away from them.
Yeah, if it's one thing about Oswego, I mean, the offense, it seemed like the offense was really good early in the year, but maybe that was a bit of a smoke screen. Not that they're not a good offense, but the defense is where they hang their hat. But every week they bring that defense. And when you can bring that defense with you every week, it gives you a good chance. So that should be a fun one to watch. Another one, the last one I want to touch on is Lyons Township, York. A couple weeks ago, I was sort of thinking Lyons Township and that West Suburban Silver, maybe they were like third in the pecking order. And now they're yet the only team that's still undefeated in this league. I still don't know what to expect from this matchup this week. Lyons has been very impressive. York has been great. And the other thing is that if Lyons wins, they got to be near the top of about close to a number 1 seed in 8A.
Oh, yeah. No, that's definitely true. I mean, they played decent enough teams in the non-conference schedule where it's not like, oh, they're not getting any points other than what they get from their conference. So that's churned out well. Their numbers are pretty good. So if they can get that win, yeah, they would be in that conversation, especially considering some of the other teams that have fallen by the wayside in regards to having 1 loss or 2 losses or something of that nature. So definitely a big factor there in terms of that. I too am not really sure kind of what to expect from this game. No. I think both of them are playing good, solid, sound football. I really expect this game to be one of those games that who makes that one mistake? That's how close I think these two teams at least appear on paper. Who makes the big mistake, who capitalizes from it. That might be all it takes to separate the two.
No, really. I mean, we make picks every week, and I think I'm going to find my nicest, shiniest nickel to toss in the air before I make that pick because I really don't know. Week 8, you're going to be following on Friday night. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that still needs to be determined. What do you think about this particularly week 8, and what are you going to be watching for Friday night?
Well, I'm going to go back to what we talked about early in this broadcast. Is that for me, it's looking at that group in the middle and how it shakes out. I mean, are there going to be teams that kind of break out of that 4-win pack and move into the 5-win pack and secure their spot, or are there going to be teams that kind of keep treading water in there because we're running out of time to tread water at this point. So, how that group ferrets out, how many more teams move into the 5-win group and how many more teams don't get there that I thought were going to. Those are the key things that I'm going to look for this week.
A lot of good stuff ahead in football-wise. A lot of good stuff Friday Night Drive. I want to remind everybody to join Eddie Carriffio and JT Petaldy. I believe they're going to have Sam Ramirez from our radio station on as well to talk about the West and South, or West and I don't know what it's called. It's a great podcast. Let's put it that way. And then Steve and Matt will be back on Friday night. Again, for Steve Soucie, I'm Josh Welge. Everybody have a great Wednesday afternoon.